Imperator Rome, the latest grand strategy from Paradox, covers Western civilization in the aftermath of Alexander the Great's death, around 300 BC up until the end of the Roman Republic. It's true that Imperator was released a couple of days ago, but because I'm definitely not the guy who gets the early copies, and I believe in thorough assessment, I wanted to spend some time with the game before reviewing it in order to give you an as unbiased, concise, and structured review as possible. A lot of the early feedback pegs it as quite bland, so I was anxious to see if I would share the same thoughts. Does Paradox's latest reward you with the time you dedicate to it? Or is it akin to playing a spreadsheet simulator with a coat of Roman arms painted on the box? The first thing you'll notice when you run the game, aside from it only being about a gig in file size, is the beautiful richness of the map and presentation. The bright colors, the way the oceans and rivers look and sound, the clouds that wisp across the lush plains and mountains. It sets the stage quite nicely, which has come to be expected of a Paradox game by now. When it comes to this genre, they're really a step above the competition. The art, music, and overall aura really draw you in an immediate way that many strategy games fail to do. If you've ever booted up Hearts of Iron 4 and heard that sweet, sweet intro music dance into your ears, you'll know what I'm talking about. Imperator achieves this as well, but I will say the music isn't quite as memorable, in my opinion at least. Zooming out on the map will show each faction's reach in clear and bold colors, while zooming in breaks it up further by showing each city's borders. Cities are grouped into provinces that collectively share resources like trade goods, and those provinces are composed of even larger regions. When you click on a city, the province it is a part of will become highlighted for easy frame of reference. A quick run-in with the UI will reveal that everything is tooltipped, which, while expected, is nice. The tutorial does a poor job of explaining it, but the top left bar displays your funds, the numerical values of your various powers, and important modifiers like your faction's stability, aggressive expansion, and the level of tyranny present. Just beneath that are your various overview screens, where you can conduct your faction's business like the economy, religious dealings, family relations, and diplomacy. Taking actions within those overview screens often requires expenditure of your various powers. Issues that require your immediate attention are shown as notifications that pop up in-game right here. And you can hover your mouse over them and they'll detail the problem. They're absolute lifesavers, and you'll be clicking on them a lot as you play. They give you some structure to a game that can sometimes feel disjointed. Also worth noting is that the game is played in real time, similar to most other Paradox games. If that puts you on edge because you're an old fogey like me, don't let it. You can slow the game to a snail's pace so you never feel rushed, and it negates the worry of if your clicks per second are high enough to keep up. In reality, it's a great feature for immersion. It doesn't have that artificial feel that turn-based games can have, but moves at a pace that, on the other hand, doesn't feel gamey. I like the formula, and because the speed is so customizable, it will probably be difficult for you to find fault with it as well. I play these games for a light challenge, not to win any competition. And it's convenient that I can play at a speed where I can also focus on my children if need be, or my other work, or anything else while the game goes on in the background, without having to worry that my empire will suddenly collapse if I hop out of the chair. On my own playthrough, I started with the tutorial. No, I'm not a stranger to Paradox games, but I wanted to see how it would present itself to a newcomer, and a refresher never hurts. When I booted her up, I was presented with some historical backstory, and the nerd in me got a little excited. Images of the rich lore, writing, and all-around quality found in Stellaris' choose-your-own-adventure type narratives rushed through my head. And I imagine the same concept infused into a historical role-playing context. Would I be making decisions on Greek gods, weary travelers, or Olympians? I'm the type who finds myself scrolling through Wikipedia articles at 3 in the morning, neglecting sleep, so this shouldn't surprise you. And I thought maybe Imperator was going to lead me to new treasures. Within the first 5 minutes, there was even a cheeky line that showed some humor, and I thought it was a foreshadowing of the heart and soul that was poured into this game, proving this game is bland camp wrong. Moving through the tutorial, it's organized in a way that's very hands-off. Objectives are laid out for you and guide you to discover the mechanics on your own. While not holding your hand has its benefits, in the end, the tutorial will leave you with only a marginal understanding of the game. Obviously, for a game like this, a tutorial can't cover every formula or mechanic, but they left a few essential items with incomplete explanations or avoided them entirely. A prime example of this is the part where you have to import fish from the Latium province via trade routes from other nations so your stupid plebs don't starve. I quickly learned here that the trade items were grouped into provinces rather than individual cities in order to reduce micromanagement, but it took me a while to find out where I could actually see how much food each province had. Why couldn't Paradox take the 2 seconds to show you where to find that information? I have no idea. Another example is conquering the Sabini. When you defeat their armies and occupy all their cities, naturally you think you've defeated them, and you think you're going to gain ownership of their cities and provinces. The tutorial makes no mention of having to open the diplomacy menu to demand those provinces if you actually want to obtain ownership. A newcomer would be left scratching their head here. I defeated them totally. Why isn't anything happening? As I played through, it became obvious that Imperator could really make use of a quick reference guide. Don't understand how food works? No problem, just look it up in the internal encyclopedia. The other thing that started to become obvious at this point was that my excitement was slowly turning to dread. The wealth of historical backstory I was hoping for, it dried up. Those role-playing elements that Stellaris pulled off so perfectly well, they were pretty much absent here, and where they did exist they seem uninspired. To be fair, a wary traveler did show up on my doorstep and ask for quarter so he could write an epic and pay homage to my faction. But instead of that creativity you'd expect in a branching storyline like Stellaris, I pretty much just had to decide if I wanted to support him or not, and then a year or two later I got a quick pop-up message saying, oops, it didn't turn out. Running through the objectives became a bit of a slog. I have to admit, at one point about midway through, I was definitely getting that Excel spreadsheet with a Roman coat of paint vibe. It's hard to explain because every grand strategy game at its heart is nothing more than a bunch of mathematical formulas, but they are made or broken in making you feel like there's something more. And for whatever reason, about halfway through that tutorial, Imperator was starting to really wear out its welcome and fall on its face in that regard. After 20 minutes or so, the tech tree seemed to blur into nothing more than a generic list of numbers in which I had to pick the highest one. The unity level became an annoying integer that I had to keep above 0 by clicking on some stupid sacrifice button every 5 or 10 minutes. The heart just seemed to be lacking, and I've got to be honest, I had a tough time even finishing the tutorial in one sitting. Yep, I was becoming disillusioned. To be fair, there's more than a few times I've initially despised these types of games until I've given them a chance to grow on me. Grand strategies can be complex, and they often have a curve that you've got to push through. The poorly explained mechanics definitely played a part, because when things started to click towards the end, I at least regained some hope. So I kept telling myself that, hey, first impressions can be wrong. I forced myself to keep going. Keeping in mind that I hadn't fully grasped those mechanics yet, I decided to start small. The idea was that my country would grow in sync with my understanding of the game, and I wouldn't be overwhelmed. Side note, there's an option to check gender equality when you start the game, and while I'm terrified this is foreshadowing of a definite slippery slope Paradox might end up sliding down, I won't deduct points here, because it's an option and it likely took very little dev hours to implement that could otherwise have been made improving the actual game. If all devs striving for historical authenticity could keep such issues within this framework, it would be good for everyone. So here's to hope. Anyway, I went with the Cynomanians, and the first thing I noticed was the backstory, or rather, the complete lack of one. True, it's a minor faction, but even Total War has backstories for the different cultural groups and manages to put in a little more effort with its own minor nations. Then again, it wouldn't be Paradox unless we left room for DLC, am I right? Playing the early game, trying to cautiously expand, the AI was about what you would expect. Thankfully, my neighbors made deals, struck alliances, and formed defensive pacts when it was mutually beneficial to theirs and my interests, and I began to settle into the balance of the game. I also noted that, as of the current build, it can be difficult to manage your cities and provinces. You have a macro builder, but it's not entirely intuitive, and a lot of critical information seems to be lacking unless you're willing to click back and forth through cities individually. An example of this is your populations. I can click the Assimilate button to forcefully assimilate a population and drive up loyalty, and it does show me in green where I can, but it doesn't give me hard numbers over the cities as I would expect. In essence, I'm doing it without all the information I'd like. Similarly, when you select it to construct buildings, there's no overlay over each city displaying pertinent information. It only shows which cities you can actually build in. I'd like more info. Which cities have which buildings to begin with? I'm pretty sure Paradox will fix this in later versions. It would be silly for them not to. After the fresh veneer of the Cynomanians wore off, I was starting to feel like I was just waiting for notifications to pop up and click on, only to quickly look through some numbers and pick whichever looked best again. and I even stopped reading the sparse text that accompanied my notifications because it was just so lackluster. Again, that Excel spreadsheet nightmare coming to fruition. IR was starting to feel an awful lot like Rome Total War 2, if Total War lacked a fun tactical battle layer and had a strategic layer that was designed by the guy who gets excited about designing the next Microsoft Word. Even the character portraits started looking a little familiar. There were a couple times throughout playing when I found myself audibly and begrudgingly saying, "This sucks." If anything, Imperator made me want to dust off Total War Rome 2 again. I almost felt like this was the poor man's indie version off-brand, without the tactical combat. Yeah, Imperator is supposed to be the deeper game, but I'm gonna be real here. A lot of times, it didn't feel like it. It felt an awful lot like a skeleton. The saving grace, I thought to myself at this point in the game, is the AI. It's leagues beyond creative assembly. And while if you played the game Total War, you know that's not saying much, anyone who loves strategy games knows how essential the AI is. So to be fair, it's not all bad, and there's definitely a little bit of potential. One of the more interesting mechanics was maintaining personal loyalty in order to prevent civil wars. Playing as tribal Gaelics, my Cinnamonians loved their independence, and tribal leaders had their own loyal cohorts, and it was a real struggle to keep them loyal to me. Gifts, managing when it was safe to give them free hands to maneuver and control their armies on their own, outside of my hand, giving them positions they desired, and deciding if they'd be dead before their loyalty ran out anyway, all had to be carefully managed. Some of these tribal leaders had retinues, their own armies funded out of their own pockets. Some of them became disloyal, and I could no longer control them on the map. There was one in particular that threatened a civil war, and he ended up having a feud with another one of my more loyal tribal leaders, so I allowed them to duel to the death. The gods favored me that day, and killed the one I wanted gone. These are the mechanics I love, and I hope Paradox expands upon them in the future. Also, it's pretty cool that I can imprison babies. I thought maybe if I tried one of the recommended nations there would be more to offer, so I switched to a nation recommended by the game, Egypt. This time I was greeted with a nice intro text, and was soon presented with more history-related story to interact with and alter. Which prominent character do I want to send to the Olympics? In another example, a world-renowned trader lost his goods and asked for funds to keep Egypt's name in good standing with the rest of the world. This is the stuff that makes games come alive, and I think Paradox would do well to expand on it in their roadmap. Playing as the Egyptians definitely felt more like a full experience compared to the Cinnamanians, and it's obvious Paradox will eventually include other nations besides the 6 base ones as an expansion material down the road. As a real faction, I slowly started to dig myself out of the pit of despair I had fallen into, and was able to appreciate more of the mechanics behind Imperator. The difficulty struck the right chord in my opinion. I expanded early and then got absolutely raped by getting greedy and going after those resource-rich cities on the island of Crete. I liked the trading concept. If you had a surplus of any trading material in a province, you would get a national bonus, but you could also trade away that surplus for a different one and a small financial gain. If you had a +2 surplus, you could trade one away and still get that sweet hometown buff. Barbarians are a real threat. I was about to send a naval invasion to get revenge on a certain Cretan city, but a spawn barbarian group postponed my plans. I did have a hard time finding out how to load cohorts onto triers, by the way. You have to make the ship leave the port and then load the troops onto it. Seems a little weird to me, but whatever. There was some sort of magical transition. I can't exactly put my finger on when, but I got to a point where I was trying to balance keeping my armies at home to thwart off barbarian invasion, expand eastward before the other Hellenic powers took independent nations, and get a foothold with the help of mercenaries from that stubborn resource-rich island of Crete, and I got a little into Imperator. Here's the deal. The game has a definite learning curve, especially if you aren't used to Paradox Games' formula, and you're going to need to put some hours in it before you truly start to enjoy it. The question is if you're willing to struggle and get over that hump, because where some of the other games succeed in holding you through that period with an atmosphere so thick you could cut it with a knife, the quality, the story, etc., IR can feel just kinda meh, and it may not be enough to carry you through into the more rewarding and deeper aspects of the game. Can I recommend this game? That's a tough one. If you're a fan of history and enjoy grand strategy, it might be worth it a couple months down the road when a sale pops up and they've chiseled that marble a bit. While Imperator certainly isn't a pile of steaming hot garbage, it's no champion of the genre either. It's probably one of my least favorite Paradox games. That being said, I have the game running in window mode in the background as I work on this review, and hearing that music, I can't help but want to kinda play it after I finish this up. I love Paradox games. Grand strategy is my forte. But I also used to love Infinity Ward's Modern Warfare series. When Modern Warfare was released, it was nearly at the level of Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, or Duke Nukem. If you're younger, you're going to hear me say that and think it's nuts, but that's because the series' reputation has been tarnished by a long history of milking it. The sequel to Modern Warfare came, and then the next one, and then the next, and by the time Call of Duty Space Warfare, the Battle for Earth's Mantle came out, it was clear what was going on, and Activision was not using lube. And now we say hello to our old friend Paradox. Much like my feeling on Call of Duty following Modern Warfare, I'm starting to think my love affair with Paradox is shifting, and we're going down that long road of disillusionment into our inevitable breakup. The factions, artwork, mechanics, writing, everything. It dangerously tiptoes that line of feeling tired and uninspired. As I've said before, several times, all grand strategy is, at its base, nothing more than a complex Excel formula. But Imperator does a less impressive job of hiding that fact. In Stellaris, every unit, race, religion, and world all felt alive and unique. In Imperator, they can feel bland, lifeless. I'm afraid we may have taken a turn in the road, and Imperator is the harbinger of where that road is headed. Hey guys, I want to thank you so much for watching. Your views mean a lot to me, as well as your comments and your subscriptions. If you like the content, if this helped you decide what you thought about maybe picking up the game, go ahead and subscribe. I'm going to do more videos like this in the future. I think I have one coming up where I'm going to be covering Steel Division 2. And yeah, if you have any business inquiries, you can check my About section on my YouTube page. And I look forward to hearing from you.